an honor to be here with Kimberly Kripe, the CEO of Children's Hospital of Orange County, to be co-moderating this session together. I'll start off by introducing myself and ask my colleagues to do the same. I'm Joe Chiani, founder and CEO of Massimo, also a member of the board of directors of CHOC, and the founder of the Patient Safety Movement Foundation.
And I'm Bob Meyer. I'm the president and CEO at Phoenix Children's Hospital.
I am Matt Cook. I am the Executive Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
I'm Joe Randolph, President and CEO of the Innovation Institute based here in Orange County.
Narendra Kinney, President and CEO of Miami Children's Health System.
Patrick Fitzgerald, I'm the VP of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and I work with Matt at CHOP.
And as you know, I'm Kim Kripe, President and CEO of CHOC Children's, and just so happy to be here this morning with such a wonderful group of people. I happen to know almost all of you fairly well, and I think you're in for a really interesting discussion with some incredible leaders in children's healthcare and different perspectives. So thank you, fellow panelists, and Joe for accepting our invitation. I think I'm going to start with just kind of a general question, and so this panel is really focusing on perspectives around innovation from a leadership and C-suite perspective. And I think I want to open it up by asking you, Patrick, to talk a little bit about innovation in your institution. Clearly, we all recognize that CHOP is one of the leading pediatric institutions. There are a couple of us here that just can't identify number one other than our own institutions, but we'll all acknowledge how fantastic CHOP is. And I was interested in reading a little bit about what you're doing with the new position that was created and that you've stepped into. So I'd love you to talk a bit about why is innovation so important in pediatric health at this time?
Sure. So as someone who didn't go to medical school and I don't play a doctor on TV in any form, my answer will be more focused on business. And I think that the two primary reasons that I saw coming into the role that the role was created was one, revenue. Understanding that with NIH dollars flatlining in terms of real dollars over the past couple of years, hospitals have to get smarter about how they attract revenue. And one of the ways you can do that is by building licensable assets, building startup spin-out companies that you own a portion of equity in that hopefully go well, some don't. But figuring out a way, how do we diversify revenue? The second part of it is not just revenue, but an open door policy. So prior to my role at CHOP, it may have been unclear, and I think it's getting clear, is if you had a great idea that maybe wasn't in the research space, so maybe it wasn't something that was publishable, if you had a great idea, where did you go? And I think oftentimes many hospitals expected doctors and nurses and researchers to be entrepreneurs, and they're not, and neither am I a doctor, right? So giving them an open door policy, a place to go to talk about their idea, and maybe it's great, maybe it's fantastic, but give them a half hour, 20 minutes. Sometimes that turns into, a 3-year-long project, or sometimes it doesn't, but giving them that open door policy. So it's revenue, diversification, and creating an open door policy.
Thank you.
Well, innovation is key in just about every sector of our world, but probably no more important in medicine, especially children's medicine. Robert is CEO of Children's Hospital in Phoenix. How do you encourage innovation at your hospital?
Yeah, we have not set up a formalized position, et cetera, to do some of this. I think we have encouraged our physicians, people, to look and solve problems. So if you look at a lot of what we're doing, which I consider innovation, a little bit different than product development, is our strength is IT. So you start to look at the products we've developed. We're licensing back to our IT vendors, et cetera. We're well over $10 million in licensing fees back. Some of the products that we're looking at have been very, very good. We really focus on patient safety. It's very interesting. When we got into a product, one of those things we licensed back to a vendor, we had a horrendous root cause event. A massive overdose, medication overdose in our ICU. In a child that saw multiple physicians, multiple nurses, everybody passed on the overdosing, et cetera. We actually stopped the implementation on the spot of a pharmacy system and built a pediatric-specific dose range checking system that is now in place in almost every Allscripts installation worldwide. With hard stops, the physician said, yes, we are willing to, you'll prevent us from ordering, based on our input, clinical data, building these things, et cetera. So we're looking at both patient safety as well as, again, cost efficiency, those kinds of things. But I think that's the issue. Really that's what drives most of our innovation or our investment are those two issues, patient safety or some type of an efficiency type of approach.
Thank you, thank you. And how do you as CEO encourage that?
Well, I think participating in the infamous medicine committee where this root cause analysis was going on, the decision to stop that entire implementation, go in a different direction, was made on the spot because I participate in those discussions. Don't see everything. Obviously, that's, I think, where you were going with how do you get people to bring their ideas forward, et cetera. But I do look at innovation much differently than I do research. I don't really see research, never, at least for us, has generated much. Though we have some things that are very interesting. We got into 3D printing on kind of a whim. We actually did it, interesting enough, for a PhD student at Arizona State University. We got into it about 5 years ago. That combined with the work we've been doing with Philips on 3D imaging, we now produce very extensive models of hearts and various other things that show not just the structure, but the abnormalities are color-coded. It helps our surgeons dramatically. We've seen tremendous improvements in our surgical outcomes because the physicians can see it. Now, the second part of that is we give the model to the parents. And so the parents have the model. They can see very clearly what we're doing, what the lesions are, et cetera. So it's tremendous communication. We used to draw it on a piece of paper, two-dimensional, et cetera. Doesn't really work very well. And so again, there's spin-offs to all of this kind of stuff. And that started just as a simple sort of a PhD research project that, we invested a little bit in, and it's really paid off.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert.
All righty. I think I'm going to turn to Joe Randolph. And when we think about innovation, there's so many gamuts to it. And number one, how do you even define what innovation is within our institutions? Is it research? Is it on and on and on? Joe has founded an innovation institute, and our organization has invested in it for a number of good reasons. But from a C-suite perspective, we were really thinking about innovation in such a highly regulated industry. What can you do as a leader to really drive innovation, support, foster, advance innovation in your organization? And Joe and the work that they did in the Innovation Institute really made a lot of sense to us. So I'd love you to talk, Joe, a little bit about innovation within health systems and kind of the pros and cons of going it alone and being independent and benefits, because I do recognize that your institute is very collaborative in nature. So I'd love you to talk a bit about benefits of collaboration when it comes to innovation and kind of the competitive forces that can come into play. So.
Sorry, Joe.
It's a great question, and my background for most of my career was in operations. And I've told this story before, and Kim's probably heard it, I think. But it got to the point where over time it felt like Groundhog Day. I mean, I'd have this, many of you probably remember that show where they had the same problems surfacing, and over time it was the same thing over and over. And I felt like we were having trouble really getting to the point where we could be innovative and make a difference. And what I found was hospitals and health systems, from my perspective, tend to be very risk-averse organizations. They focus on things like Lean and Six Sigma and evidence-based medicine, and it's for good reason when you're thinking about patient safety and delivering patient care. But when you're thinking about innovation, you really need to be in an environment where you can take risk and reward failure, because that's ultimately where you're going to make the breakthroughs and come up with the transformational ideas. And so, as Kim said, a few years ago, we formed the Innovation Institute 3 years ago, And it's set up to be a collaborative, not just a collaborative with other health systems, which we have 5 in at this point, but it's also a collaborative with industry, so we can bring in industry partners to co-develop new products. And we reward the inventors. They get a significant incentive to submit their ideas, and a lot of them come from physicians and employees. And I've always thought that physicians are scientists at heart, and they always are looking for new ways of delivering care. And oftentimes those people on the front lines are the ones that have the biggest ideas, but they've never had any place to take them, as was said earlier.
Thank you. Maybe going off of what Robert was saying, how their focus is on patient safety, the third leading cause of death in our country is preventable deaths from medical errors. I'm going to ask Dr. Kinney, who is CEO and an MD, what is Miami Children doing? What are you doing as a CEO to eliminate preventable deaths at your hospital?
Good question, Joe. First of all, I think the biggest issue there is the concept of preventable itself, and it starts with people. If you want an example of how deeply rooted culture is in institutions, look at my co-panelists. We were told to wear casual. Did you all of you see that? And I'm the only one wearing jeans. Everybody else is still formally dressed. So it doesn't matter what you say, people still do.
You are from Miami,
believe.
though,
You see
so.
that now?
You don't understand what casual is.
That's Miami casual. This is our casual.
This is our casual. Yeah.
But the concept of preventable deaths is something that I believe is an institutional issue. It's been embedded in the culture for a long time. You can still read medical literature. You'll see things like expected mortality rate or expected complication rate. And these things indicate to you that people do believe there will be some sort of process failure. Even when you write the right amount of data or you put in publishable material, there's still the expectation that variances will occur. So the cultural acceptance of error is one issue that we are attacking very vigorously. And the first step is to build a culture of zero tolerance and believe that it's possible to build an error-free environment. That's one. The second is start to take away some allowance for judgment in critical care processes and embed and digitize them. I understand that we're all practitioners. We all have this belief in independence and the fact that medicine is not a cookbook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, when it comes to end processes that determine outcomes, those should be digitized, standardized, and very little allowance for variation. This has been proven in other industry, and the results are fairly precise. So the second is digitization and embedding of standardization, not just standardization. The third is relentless real-time measurement. If you do not know what the outcome is on almost a real-time basis, then it allows for retrospective looks. And as an industry, think about it, we're still doing things called root cause analysis. You're looking backward to see what happened, when indeed our systems today and architectural stacks should enable real-time looks at what you consider critical care processes. So if you start to look at the evolution of a culture, embed processes, and then build the right technology stack, it starts to position you to get to that point where a zero-error environment is actually feasible in medicine. And we believe that. We have come to believe that. We have clinical excellence indices now that are beginning to show progression towards zero. And I think at Miami Children's Health System, we're at the last mile. I will not lie to you. We still do have unexpected variation, but it is significantly less than about 7 years ago when this journey started.
Wow, that was excellent. Kimberly, I just got the hook from Anthony. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask each member to give us their closing thoughts about how they bring innovation to their institution and what they recommend the rest of us to do.
Yeah, I think I agree exactly with where you're going. It reminds me of a very interesting debate I was having with physicians. Being a non-clinician, I have this great sort of point of view, which is I don't understand what you all are doing. But we were having a discussion about zero events. And the physicians were negotiating with me incentives of what should the error rates be. And I said, okay, what part of this am I missing? It's either zero or this is not a measure we should be pursuing. But I think the point is it's sort of a relentless sort of look at it. You have to embed it. It's a cultural issue. encourage people to bring things forward, because again, that's the biggest issue. We spend a lot of time in implementing communication processes throughout the organization that allow people to be willing and feel free to bring things up. There's a lot of fear in healthcare. There's a lot of people that are afraid to question what a physician does, whatever it happens to be. We've tried very hard to eliminate that, because until you get that out, you know, and there's just a lot of things that are kind of obvious, but people don't bring them up.
I think from the perspective of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, I think part of our journey with innovation was really first defining what it is. And we're a organization that historically defined it as developing novel ways of treating patients coming out of the Research Institute. And a big change for us was stepping back and defining innovation much more broadly to the point of how do we even interact with a patient? Can't that be innovative in and of itself? And part of our journey really was getting out of our own way. We are all in large, complex organizations, and it's not clear how to support innovation. And so we had to go back to ground zero and say, what are the structures, what are the things that we can put in place, the processes that we can put in place that encourage people to come forward with ideas and allow them to bring them to fruition, whether it is stepping out of their roles for 6 months, whether it is partnering with families to pursue an idea. So that's really, I think, where we ended up in Philadelphia, is trying to get out of our own way and let the ideas come to fruition.
I think is some of what I've heard is, you know, make it safe for people to bring their ideas forward. And so we have different tools and different ways of doing that. There's a traditional model where somebody has an idea and they fill out a disclosure form and it gets evaluated and incubated all the way to commercialization. And then there's other processes where you can do challenges using social tools and software. There's also facilitated innovation where you can bring people together with subject matter experts and work together to solve a problem. So I think the main thing is having the vehicles and making it safe for the people, and then providing the right kind of rewards so that people are incentivized to bring their ideas forward.
We just decided to duplicate the Menlo Park environment. So we took a very bold step, built out a for-profit venture, Children's Health Ventures. This is an incubator. There are multiple companies, and you can come to our booth and see them. We actually funded them, convinced our board that it will be an at-risk funding, and if and when one of these takes off, then the rest of our family, we call all our staff family, will know that it's safe to be able to bring up your idea, and the board policy allows for an inventor to get a piece of the action. So it is a separate for-profit component of the health system, and we're very excited. We have about 5 or 6 investments now with ideas and joint ventures.
Matt sort of alluded to it, but getting people to get out of their roles, give people the time, is something I deal with every day. So, these are world-class experts who are treating patients and have a day job, but giving them the time to spend 1 day a week or 2 days a week, 2 days a week on an amazing concept or amazing idea is very, very rare. And luckily at CHOP, we've been giving people that long leash to go out and explore those things.
From my perspective, I think, and my colleagues have talked a lot about it, but just the mere idea of how do you define innovation in a healthcare enterprise is pretty daunting. I mean, we have a traditional definition. So by nature, our industry is extremely regulated, and from a C-suite perspective, we're really rewarded and measured based on predictability. And, you know, do we hit our budget targets? How does bond rating and all those kinds of things that are really important in making sure that our institutions stay open and that we get to the point where we're eliminating patient harm. But those very processes and that bureaucracy is, I think, flies in the face, frankly, of creating and supporting and advancing innovation. So from my perspective, I think holding the mirror up, honestly, and really looking at your structure and how you govern and how you lead as an organization, and being mindful that you need to make investments. You need to make investments in your manpower and in your leadership after a couple couple of years of going at this, we weren't making the kind of progress we needed to make. So doing simple things like acknowledging I need a chief innovation officer. I was fortunate to have Dr. Chang, who was running our Heart Institute, and asked Anthony, hey, how would you like to spend some more time doing something else that's important? So finding the right people that have the passion and the drive and frankly the courage to take it on within an industry that rewards predictability. It's also a very litigious industry, and I think Bob spoke to it. We're very risk adverse, so when you get these innovative ideas, I mean, we're measured on standards of care. So how do you take a great idea and accelerate it and allow it to get to the bedside when you may find yourself in court someday and the world's going to measure you on whether you followed a standard of care that's probably 20 or 25 years old. So I think as leaders really understanding that we have to change things, and the only people in the organization who really have the ability to do that is in the C-suite. Hire new people, set up new systems, make investments, create new opportunities for the brilliant people that work in our organizations who do know how to innovate, to have a safe haven and have a way to bring their ideas forward. Whether it's the physicians, the nurses, people cooking in the kitchen, everyone has something to contribute in your innovative efforts.
Thank you so much, Kim. Any question from the audience? This is a good time to send it to me before we wrap up. Now, you mentioned something as the audience thinks about their question. How do you speed up the gap? How do you reduce the gap between knowledge of what's best to do and practice of what is really done? It's 17 years, I think, is what is being quoted in our industry. How do you do that?
I think about this a lot because great ideas come forward and just the root cause analysis. I mean, it's acceptable to give 30 days to get a root cause analysis back. I mean, it's crazy. So what do I try to do? Frankly, I think the things that we think about and talk about. So if we're not talking about the unbelievable conviction we have around eliminating all preventable patient errors and deaths all the time, our systems and structures aren't going to allow it. So I just think having top-of-mind awareness and sharing what's on your mind with your teams is essential because people do know what to do. I personally don't know exactly what to do, but I work with a lot of brilliant people who do know what to do. So paying attention to it and talking about different things than you might have talked about 5 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you. I think with leadership comes responsibility, and sometimes you got to take risk when you know it's the right thing to do for patients, which is, I think, what you're saying, which is wonderful. Thank you. We don't have any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Here.
Yes.
Hi, Suresh Children's Hospital, Pittsburgh. Would you like a mic?
I'll have a mic over. Thank you. Suresh from Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. Thanks for the great dialogue. Can you give your honest opinion, impression on payment reform over the next 5 to 10 years? Because unless there is a dramatic change in reimbursable clinical care, I feel innovation cannot be sustained in most children's hospitals, not necessarily the big ones. It may be digressing a little bit, but can you give me your take on it? Thanks.
Let me try that, being from the Deep South. Miami Children's Health System is exotically located, but we're 70% Medicaid, and the state of Florida ranks near the bottom when it comes to Medicaid programs. I'm not sure that any sort of reform or presidential election will change this trend anytime soon. So I don't care which political leaning we have. Our preparation is to assume that there's either a flat or consistently decreasing rate of reimbursement regardless of business model. The idea is innovation is part of the engine that will supplant that problem, and it is an alternative source of revenue. We don't believe that the clinical care dollars will drive innovation. In fact, we're betting against it. This is the time where we're engaging non-traditional sources of potential revenue. Venture funds, private equity funds, other angel investors, joint partners that will put in money into these ideas, hoping that they will scale the same manner as startups do. And indeed, if they do, we cycle back the revenues to the health system. That's indeed the actual reason why we have the for-profit arm of a not-for-profit system. It's that exact problem. I would not bet on innovation and link it in any sort of way to reimbursement reform. It's just a failing formula.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to wrap up. I just want to say what an honor it's been to have such an amazing panel of great individuals from great institutions. Thanks for co-moderating with me, Kim. Thank you. Any closing words, Kim?
I think we want to recognize you too, Joe. It's a wonderful panel. Thank you for participating. And I think on behalf of all of us who serve patients, I thank you for your leadership in the patient safety movement. You've been such a profound leader and impetus in helping all of us look at the way we're caring for our patients and innovating. So thank you. And thank all of you. Good morning.